Effective immediately, you're suspended, pending investigation for gross negligence.
The truth has a way of surviving longer than lies, Miss Sloan.
Security will escort you downstairs.
You want me to start at the bottom?
Not just start there, you'll stay there for 7 years.
7 years? Without anyone knowing who I am?
Exactly. You'll work every department from the floor up.
Wherever I'm assigned?
Every single one. You'll earn every lesson the hard way.
And if people mistreat me?
Then they'll reveal who they truly are.
I won't disappoint you, Grandpa.
Don't do it for me, Alexander. Do it for every person who'll one day depend on the decisions you make.
The mail cart wheel caught on a crack in the marble floor, and Alexander Hayes nearly lost the whole top tray, 40 envelopes sliding sideways as he threw his hip against the cart to stop it from tipping. A woman in a cream blazer stepped around him without slowing down, her heels clicking past like he was a pothole she'd learned to avoid. "Watch where you're pushing that thing," she said, not even turning her head. Alexander steadied the tray, tucked a loose envelope back into place, and kept walking. 7 years of mornings, just like this one, had taught him exactly how to catch a falling stack of mail and exactly how to let an insult roll off his shoulders without his face ever changing. If you've ever been the person nobody in the room bothered to really see, stay with this one to the end, because what happens to Alexander is going to feel like it was written for you. Hit subscribe before we go any further, because this story only gets bigger from here. By the time he reached the 40th floor, his shirt was damp at the collar, and his badge, the one that read Mailroom in small gray letters, had flipped backward on its lanyard. He fixed it out of habit, not because anyone was looking. Nobody up here ever really looked. He passed the glass-walled office of Daniel Pierce, who was leaning back in his chair with his shoes on the desk, laughing at something on his phone. Daniel glanced up, saw the cart, and didn't bother acknowledging him at all. 2 doors down, an assistant thrust an empty coffee cup into Alexander's free hand without breaking stride. "Toss that for me, would you?" she said. It wasn't a question. He tossed it. He always tossed it. At home that evening, Emma Carter was already at the small kitchen table when he walked in, a stack of customer complaint files spread out in front of her, her reading glasses pushed up into her hair. She looked up, and her whole face changed, the way it always did when he came through the door, like the day had been waiting for this exact moment to become good. "There he is," she said, standing to kiss him. "You smell like the loading dock." "I was on the loading dock," Alexander said, setting his bag down. "Apparently, I'm also unofficial furniture mover now." Emma laughed, but there was something underneath it, something that had been building for months. She sat back down and turned one of her files over so it wasn't staring up at both of them. "Alex, I saw the promotion board today. Regional Coordinator, Customer Experience. You'd be perfect for it. You know this company inside and out, probably better than half the VPs." "My time hasn't come yet," Alexander said, the same 6 words he always said, gentle enough that it never sounded like a wall, even though it was. "You always say that." Emma wasn't angry, just tired in a way that had nothing to do with the hour. "I don't understand it. You're smarter than anyone in that building. You remember things nobody else even notices, and you're happy pushing a cart." "I'm happy coming home to you," he said, and meant it completely, and it was true, and it was also not the whole truth, and the gap between those two things sat quietly in his chest, the way it had for 7 years. What Emma didn't know, what almost nobody knew, was that Alexander Hayes was the only grandson of Marcus Kingsley, the man who had built Kingsley Global Holdings from a single boutique hotel into one of the largest luxury hospitality corporations in the country. Before Marcus stepped back from the company, he had sat his grandson down in a study lined with photographs of hotels that didn't exist yet, and given him one condition. "You will spend 7 years at the bottom of this company," his grandfather had said, in the voice Alexander remembered from every important moment of his childhood, calm and absolutely certain. "You will learn every department from the floor up. You will let people show you exactly who they are when they believe you have no power over them. That is the only way you will ever understand what you're protecting. Only then will you sit in this chair." Only 3 people alive knew the truth: the chairman, the family's attorney, and Alexander's grandmother, who still called him every Sunday and asked him, without fail, "Are you learning what you need to learn?" He always told her yes. He didn't always tell her how much it cost him to watch people he respected get stepped on by people who had never once had to earn anything. Because Alexander carried the mail through nearly every department in the building. He saw things no single executive could ever piece together. He saw a budget memo from facilities that didn't match a budget memo from finance. He saw termination letters that used the same 3 vague phrases no matter who they were firing or why. He saw bonus disbursement lists that grew heavier every quarter for the same small circle of names, all of them reporting, directly or indirectly, to one woman. Victoria Sloan, vice president of operations, ran her department like a private kingdom, and Alexander had spent the better part of a year, quietly, patiently, learning exactly how. She was rerouting a portion of the employee bonus pool into a shell consulting arrangement that funneled money back to her through a cousin's LLC. She was promoting people who owed her loyalty over people who had simply done better work. She had pushed at least 4 honest employees into resignation by making their jobs quietly impossible, reassigning their accounts, cutting their support staff, freezing them out of meetings until they had no choice but to leave. And every quarter, she adjusted the numbers just enough to inflate her own executive bonus without tripping any obvious alarm. He remembered the exact afternoon it stopped feeling like a pattern and started feeling like a certainty. He was delivering a stack of interoffice mail to the finance floor when he passed an open door and heard a woman crying, quietly, trying not to be heard. Her name was Patricia Nkemderim, a 15-year accountant who had trained half the department, and she was clearing out her desk into a cardboard box while a junior staffer avoided her eyes from across the room. Alexander set the mail down and asked if she needed help carrying anything to her car. She looked at him like she hadn't expected anyone to ask. "They didn't fire me," she told him quietly, taping the box shut. "They just kept moving my accounts to other people until there was nothing left for me to do. Victoria called it a restructuring. I called it being pushed out the window 1 brick at a time." She managed a small, tired laugh. "You're the only person who said a word to me all day, and you're not even in this department." Alexander carried her box to the parking garage and didn't say much because there wasn't much he could say yet that wouldn't be a lie. But he remembered her name. He remembered the date. And that night, in the storage unit 20 minutes from his apartment, he added her file to the folder and wrote across the top of it, in his own handwriting, the words nobody asked. He did the same thing 3 more times over the following year, for a facilities coordinator who'd raised a safety concern and been quietly transferred out, for a junior analyst who'd questioned a bonus calculation and been managed out within 2 quarters, for a security guard who'd reported seeing Daniel Pierce let himself into a restricted floor after hours and been told to mind his own department. Every one of them believed, right up until the moment they lost their jobs, that the system protecting them actually worked. Alexander carried that knowledge through the hallways every single day, and it was heavier than any mail cart he ever pushed. Alexander didn't go to the chairman the moment he understood what he was looking at. His grandfather's test had never really been about catching a thief. It was about becoming the kind of leader who knew the difference between reacting and building a case, between anger and patience, between exposing someone the moment it felt satisfying and exposing them the moment it would actually protect the people underneath them. So, he kept the mail cart moving. He kept smiling at people who barely saw him. And in a locked drawer in a storage unit 20 minutes from the apartment he shared with Emma, a folder grew thicker every month. While Alexander was building his case one quiet Tuesday at a time, Daniel Pierce had started paying very close attention to Emma Carter. Daniel worked 2 floors above customer relations, handsome in the practiced way of a man who had been told his whole life that he was the most interesting person in any room, and he had decided, somewhere around March, that Emma was a problem worth solving. He started finding reasons to walk through her department. He started complimenting her work in meetings where she hadn't said much. He started leaning against the edge of her desk in a way that made it clear he wasn't there about the quarterly reports. "You're wasted down here," he told her one afternoon, arms crossed, smiling like he was doing her a favor. "I could get you moved to my team by next month. Better title, better office, better everything. And I hear Aspen's beautiful this time of year, if you ever wanted to see it." "I'm good where I am," Emma said, not even looking up from her screen. "Everybody says that until they're not." Daniel's smile didn't move. "Your husband's a mailroom clerk, Emma. 7 years and he's still pushing a cart. Doesn't that tell you something? It tells me he's patient, Emma said. And this time she did look up, and whatever Daniel saw in her expression made him straighten and walk away without another word. He tried twice more over the following weeks. Both times, Emma turned him down flat, and both times, his charm curdled a little more into something meaner right beneath the surface. He started asking around about Alexander. He started watching the mailroom schedule. And when a set of confidential merger documents went missing from the executive floor, documents Daniel himself had quietly moved into a locked cabinet under a false label, he made sure the security log showed Alexander's badge swiping into that hallway at the exact time the files disappeared. Victoria Sloan didn't need much convincing. A missing document scandal involving the mailroom was exactly the kind of clean, simple story that kept anyone from looking too closely at her own department. Within 2 days, Alexander was called into a windowless conference room on the 38th floor, where Victoria sat with her hands folded and her voice pitched into something that almost sounded like regret. "We take confidentiality very seriously here," she said. "Given the badge logs, given your access, I don't see how we have a choice." "I didn't take those files," Alexander said. It was the first time in 7 years he had raised his voice above a calm, even register inside that building, and even now it barely rose at all. "I've never once opened a document that wasn't mine to carry." "The badge logs say otherwise," Victoria said, sliding a printed sheet across the table without quite meeting his eyes. "Then the badge logs are wrong, or someone made them wrong," Alexander said. "Pull the camera footage from that hallway. It'll show you exactly what I'm telling you." "Camera footage from that wing has been down for maintenance since Monday," Victoria said. And for just a moment, something flickered behind her composure, something that almost looked like satisfaction. "Convenient timing, I know. I wish I had better news for you." "I understand this is difficult," she went on, already reaching for the folder that would end the conversation. "But you're suspended, effective immediately, pending investigation of gross negligence." 2 security guards walked him out through the lobby at 11 in the morning, past the fountain, past the reception desk, past employees who stopped what they were doing to watch the quiet mailroom clerk get escorted through the front doors like he'd been caught stealing. Nobody said anything to defend him. Nobody except Emma, who heard what happened before he'd even made it home, and who walked into her supervisor's office an hour later and put her resignation letter on the desk without a single word of explanation, because she would rather lose a job she loved than sit 1 floor away from people who had just humiliated her husband in front of the entire company. That night, in their apartment, Emma sat across from Alexander at the same small kitchen table, and for the first time in 7 years, she saw something in his face she didn't recognize. Not embarrassment, not defeat. Something closer to a decision being made. "I know you didn't do this," she said quietly. "I know," he said back, and reached across the table and held her hand, and didn't say anything else, because tomorrow morning there was somewhere he finally needed to be. This is the part of the story people wait the whole video for, so if you've made it this far, tap that subscribe button now, because what happens next in that boardroom is going to make you want to stand up out of your chair. The next morning, the annual shareholder and board meeting opened exactly on schedule in the glass-walled room on the top floor of Kingsley Global's headquarters, the same floor Alexander had pushed his cart. Through 1,000 mornings without anyone offering him so much as a seat. Executives filed in with coffee and printed agendas, expecting a routine vote to confirm the company's next chief executive, a name that had been quietly assumed for months to be Victoria Sloan's. Victoria herself sat near the head of the table in a new suit, already composing her acceptance remarks in her head. The doors opened one final time, and the chairman of the board, a silver-haired man named Robert Ashford, who had served Marcus Kingsley for 3 decades, rose to his feet before anyone had even called the meeting to order. "Before we proceed," Ashford said, "there's someone who should be here for this." The doors at the back of the room opened again, and Alexander Hayes walked in, wearing the same simple gray jacket he'd worn to the mailroom the day before, and stopped at the head of the table where an empty chair had been waiting the entire time. "Please welcome," Ashford said, his voice carrying easily across the silent room, "the rightful owner of Kingsley Global Holdings, Alexander Hayes, grandson of our founder, and, as of this morning, our new chief executive officer." For a moment, nobody moved at all. Then, one by one, starting with Ashford himself, Every board member in the room rose to their feet. Victoria Sloane's coffee cup slipped half an inch in her hand before she caught it, her face draining of color so completely that the man beside her reached out, uncertain whether she was about to faint. 2 seats down, Daniel Pierce sat frozen, his mouth slightly open, doing the math on every cruel thing he'd ever said to a man he now understood had been watching him the entire time. Outside the glass wall of the boardroom, Emma stood in the hallway, having been asked by Ashford's assistant that morning to please come to headquarters and wait. And through the glass, she watched every powerful person in that room stand up for the man she had shared a small apartment and 7 quiet years with, and her hand went to her mouth, and she felt the floor tilt slightly beneath her, not from fear, but from the sheer dizzying size of everything she hadn't known. Alexander didn't smile in triumph. He didn't look at Victoria, and he didn't look at Daniel, not yet. He looked instead at the empty chair, and then out through the glass at his wife, and something in his shoulders finally, quietly, let go of a weight he'd been carrying since the day his grandfather first sat him down in that study. He didn't open his first address to the company by talking about revenue or growth targets or shareholder value. He stood at the head of that table and talked about dignity. "For 7 years," he said, "I pushed a cart through this building. I want to tell you what I saw from that cart, because I don't think most of you have ever had the chance to see it." He talked about the woman on the cleaning crew who worked the night shift and had never once been thanked by name. He talked about the receptionist on the 12th floor who absorbed rudeness from executives all day and never let it touch her voice on the phone. He talked about the warehouse workers who kept the entire supply chain running and had gone 4 years without a single raise while executive bonuses climbed every quarter. "Every one of those people," Alexander said, "showed me who they really were when they thought it didn't matter, because they thought I had no power to reward them for it. I did. I just hadn't been given the chair yet." Then his tone changed, and he set a thick folder down on the table in front of him, the same folder that had spent a year growing heavier in a locked drawer 20 minutes from his apartment. He laid out, item by item, the shell arrangement Victoria Sloane had used to redirect employee bonus funds. He laid out the pattern of forced resignations disguised as voluntary departures. He laid out the falsified financial reports that had inflated her own compensation for 3 straight years. And then he turned finally to Daniel Pierce and described exactly how a set of merger documents had been moved into a mislabeled cabinet, and exactly which badge log entries had been quietly altered to make it look like someone else's crime. Security entered the room before Alexander finished speaking. Victoria was escorted out first, her composure completely gone, protesting into a hallway that offered her nothing back. Daniel followed a few minutes later, his earlier, confidence nowhere to be found, both of them removed from Kingsley Global before the meeting had even adjourned. When the room finally settled, Alexander did something nobody in that boardroom expected from a man who had just exposed 2 of the company's most senior executives. He didn't fill their vacated positions with familiar names or wealthy insiders. He asked Ashford for a list of every employee who had shown consistent integrity under difficult conditions. The ones who had done the right thing when doing the wrong thing would have been easier and safer. And over the following weeks, one by one, he promoted them. When it was Emma's turn, when word reached her that a position was being created specifically with her in mind, she said no. She said it to Alexander directly in their kitchen, over the same stack of customer files she'd been working through the night everything changed. "I don't want it because I'm your wife," she told him. "If I ever take something like that, I want to know I earned it the same way anyone else would have to." Alexander didn't argue with her. He respected that answer more than he could have said out loud, because it told him something about her he already believed, but had never heard confirmed in her own voice, that she wanted to be judged on the same ground as everyone else, exactly the way he had spent 7 years insisting on for himself. Months later, an independent review of every department's performance, conducted with no knowledge of who was married to whom, ranked Emma's work in customer relations among the strongest in the company. When the promotion came, it came without a single asterisk attached to it, and when she read the letter, she cried in a way she hadn't let herself cry through any of the rest of it. That evening, Alexander sat across from her at their kitchen table, no longer small out of necessity, but kept exactly where it had always been, because neither of them wanted to lose the place where they had built their whole life together before any of this happened. "I need to apologize to you," he said. 7 years. I let you believe things about me that weren't true because I thought I was protecting the test, protecting my grandfather's wishes, protecting the company. But I wasn't protecting you. I was just keeping you outside of something you deserved to be inside of. Emma reached across the table and took his hand, the same way she had the night he came home, suspended and humiliated, and said almost nothing at all. "I never doubted who you were, Alex," she said. "Not for one day. I just didn't understand why you couldn't trust me with the weight of it. That's the only part that ever hurt." "You have all of it now," he said. "Every bit of the weight. I don't want to carry any of it without you knowing exactly what it is." That conversation didn't end their story. It became the real beginning of it, a marriage no longer built on a kind, careful secret, but on the kind of honesty that only gets stronger the longer two people choose it. In the years that followed, Kingsley Global became known throughout the industry for something almost nobody expected from a company that size, a culture where the person pushing the cart and the person in the corner office were held to exactly the same standard, where promotions followed performance instead of proximity to power, and where the values printed in the employee handbook actually matched the way people were treated in the hallway. Alexander never forgot what it felt like to be handed an empty coffee cup like he was invisible, and he made sure that the company he now led never let another person feel that way if he could help it. He called Patricia and Kim to him himself 2 weeks after the board meeting and offered her back the department she had trained half of and been quietly pushed out of. She cried on the phone, and this time she didn't try to hide it. He tracked down the security guard who'd been ignored for reporting Daniel's late-night visits to the restricted floor and made him head of a security division that finally had the authority to act on what its people actually saw. Every name in that folder from the storage unit found its way, eventually, back to something better than what had been taken from them, not as charity, but as correction, the kind Alexander believed a company owed the people who had built it quietly and honestly for years, without ever being thanked. On the first anniversary of the day he walked into that boardroom, Alexander stood once more in front of the full staff. Not just the board, but every department, gathered in the atrium his grandfather had built, the very first Kingsley Hotel, around decades earlier. He didn't talk about revenue that day either. He introduced Patricia by name. He introduced the security guard by name. He asked the cleaning crew who worked the night shift to stand. And for the first time in the building's history, the entire room applauded people most of them had never once looked at twice. And on quiet evenings, long after the board meetings and the headlines and the reporters had all moved on to someone else's story, Alexander and Emma still sat at the same table, in the same apartment they'd never quite gotten around to leaving. Not because they couldn't afford somewhere bigger, but because that small kitchen table was where the truth had finally been set down between them, and neither one of them ever wanted to eat dinner anywhere else. If this story moved you even a little, you already know what to do. Subscribe, tell us in the comments which moment hit you hardest, and we'll see you in the next one.